So think about the last, massive blow up you had.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it was at work over some mismanaged project. Or maybe it was just in your kitchen with your spouse over something totally mundane, like the electric bill.
Usually is the electric bill.
Exactly. And you probably walked away from that screaming match or, that awful, icy, passive-aggressive silence, just thinking your relationship or your team was totally broken.
Right. Because we're taught to look at that kind of friction as a symptom of a disease dynamic.
Yeah.
We think, if we were healthy, we just wouldn't be fighting at all.
But what if that friction was actually the only way your relationship could grow? What if the disagreement itself was literally the engine of your progress and the screaming was just, well, the software glitch?
It's a huge paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Because we had this deeply ingrained cultural assumption that a peaceful life means a life entirely devoid of friction.
Like peace equals quiet.
Exactly. We equate harmony with silence. But, biologically, sociologically, any system that has zero friction is a system that is dead.
Wow, dead.
Yes, stagnant. The goal isn't to eradicate the friction. The goal is to figure out why we keep turning that really productive friction into a destructive fire.
And that is exactly what today's deep dive is about. We're going to fundamentally rewire how you look at the people you disagree with.
It's going to be a heavy one.
It is. We are pulling our focus today from a document called The Peaceful World Blueprint, version 1.0. Now, it's this incredibly dense, ambitious manifesto that tries to map out the architecture of a functioning civilization. But, and this is important, we aren't looking at the whole thing today.
Right. No, that would take weeks.
We'd be here forever. So we are zeroing in on a single, highly concentrated paragraph. It's point 11 of their framework, and it's titled Conflict Without Destruction.
Which is arguably the most complex part of the entire blueprint. Because, it doesn't deal with external laws or economics. It deals entirely with the internal psychological mechanics of human interaction.
It's all about how humanity processes its own friction. So our mission today is just to put this one paragraph under a microscope.
I'm ready.
Okay, I want to jump straight into the deep end here because the very first sentence of point 11 sets the table for everything else. It literally says, conflict of interest is an engine of development. Violence is a glitch.
The language there is just incredibly deliberate.
Let's unpack that.
Well, society uses the words conflict and violence almost interchangeably, right?
Yeah, totally.
If two nations are shooting at each other, we call it an armed conflict. If two coworkers are actively trying to ruin each other's careers, we call it a workplace conflict.
Right, we lump it all together.
Exactly. And the blueprint demands we cleave those two words apart immediately.
So when I read the word engine, my mind immediately went to, the internal combustion engine in a car.
That's the perfect way to look at it.
Right. Because if you think about what is actually happening under the hood of your car when you're driving down the highway, it is a profoundly violent environment.
Oh, absolutely.
You have literal explosions happening thousands of times a minute.
Thousands of controlled explosions.
Yeah. You have intense heat, massive amounts of metal-on-metal friction between the pistons and the cylinders. I mean, if you just looked at a cross-section of a running engine without understanding what it was for, you would think you were looking at a machine designed to destroy itself.
It looks like pure chaos. But the chaos is an illusion.
Exactly.
What you are actually looking at is channeled energy.
So the differing forces, the spark, the fuel expansion, the resistance of the metal, they're all pushing against each other to turn the crankshaft. If you remove the friction, if you just decide, hey, these explosions are way too messy, let's take them away.
You don't go anywhere.
You don't move. You are just sitting in a 2-ton metal box on your driveway.
Right. And in human terms, that is a conflict of interest. My interest might be saving money for retirement.
And your partner's interest might be renovating the kitchen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are opposing forces. But meeting in the middle of those opposing forces is what actually moves our lives forward. It's what forces us to budget, to compromise, to grow.
So what does it look like when we take the engine away, in a real-world setting?
Let's look at the psychology of the workplace. Because organizational psychologists spend a lot of time studying teams that prioritize getting along over everything else.
The people-pleasing team.
Right. And in environments where conflict of interest is viewed as inherently bad, you don't get peace.
What do you get?
You get artificial harmony. People just start self-censoring.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've seen that.
Think about a junior engineer who sees a massive safety flaw in a new product design.
Right.
But the lead engineer loves the design.
So the junior engineer stays quiet to keep the peace.
Exactly. The engine is turned off.
which eventually leads to groupthink, total stagnation, and probably a catastrophic failure down the line. Avoiding the conflict literally means avoiding development.
You're choosing the comfort of a parked car over the risk of driving anywhere.
Because we're terrified of the risk. We're terrified of what the blueprint calls the glitch. So, sticking with the car analogy, what happens when the cooling system fails? Or when the oil runs out?
Well, then the friction stops being a catalyst for movement.
Right. The engine overheats, the metal starts to warp, the piston seize up, and the whole thing literally tears itself apart.
And that mechanical breakdown, that destruction, is what the blueprint defines as violence.
Okay, wait, let me wrap my head around that.
So violence, whether it is physical, verbal, emotional, or even structural, it is not the inevitable outcome of differing interests. It is a system failure.
It's the glitch.
It's the glitch. It's what happens when our internal cooling systems fail, when our communication skills, our emotional regulation, or our empathy circuits just completely break down under the pressure of the friction.
I mean, calling it a glitch is wildly optimistic, though, isn't it?
How so?
Well, if you think about a software glitch, it's just an error in the code. It's an unintended function. But more importantly, a glitch implies the existence of a patch.
Yes. That's the core optimism of the text.
It means we aren't genetically doomed to destroy each other. We just have some buggy code in our conflict resolution software that we need to debug.
But debugging that software requires a complete paradigm shift in how we identify threats. Because biologically, we are hardwired to react to a threat with a fight, flight, or freeze response.
The old lizard brain.
Right. When you are engaged in a conflict of interest and the tension starts to rise, your brain perceives a literal threat. It prepares for combat. The blueprint gives us a very specific cognitive override to prevent that combat from turning into violence.
Okay, let's get into that override, because the next sentence in the text reads, and this is a big one, we learn to separate the person from the problem. Our enemy is enmity itself, not the opponent.
It's profound.
It is, but I have to be honest, I need to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
Because this sounds beautiful in, like, a philosophy seminar, but let's apply it to a real infuriating situation.
Okay.
Let's say I live in an apartment, and my upstairs neighbor decides that 3 a.m. is the perfect time to practice their heavy metal drum solo.
Oh, that's the worst.
And I have to be up at 6 a.m. for work. It is incredibly difficult for me to separate the person from the problem, because the person is the problem.
Right. They're literally holding the drumsticks.
Yes. My sleep deprivation is the direct result of their actions. My biology is screaming that they are an active threat to my health.
And your biology is not wrong to perceive a threat to your well-being. But it is taking a massive cognitive shortcut by entirely conflating the source of the problem with the person's identity.
So that's the glitch.
This is the exact moment the glitch begins. Let's actually look at the neurology, what happens when you decide your neighbor is the enemy.
Okay, so I'm lying in bed, I'm staring at the ceiling, feeling my blood pressure rise. What is happening in my head?
Your amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection center, has completely hijacked your nervous system.
I can feel it just thinking about it.
It is flooding your body with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate increases. But more importantly, from a conflict perspective, this physiological state physically restricts blood flow to your prefrontal cortex.
Wait, really? It physically restricts blood flow?
Yes. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain responsible for complex problem solving, empathy, nuance, and long-term planning. So when you declare the neighbor as your enemy, you are literally locking your brain into a primitive state where the only visible solutions are dominance or submission.
Wow. Which totally explains the shower arguments.
The shower arguments.
You know, the next morning you are in the shower, angrily washing your hair, having these intense imaginary screaming matches with the neighbor where you brilliantly humiliate them.
Oh, absolutely. We all do that.
You are dedicating massive amounts of mental energy to destroying a phantom version of this person.
And while you are doing that, you are starving the problem-solving part of your brain. Enmity literally makes us less intelligent.
That is wild.
The word enmity means active hostility, ill will, deep-seated hatred.
Yeah.
The blueprint tells us that our enemy is enmity itself. This is an act of psychological judo.
Judo. I like that.
The text is asking you to recognize that the hatred you feel in your chest is a far greater threat to your goal of getting a good night's sleep than the neighbor is.
Because the enmity prevents me from finding a solution.
Exactly.
If I go upstairs consumed by enmity, I'm going to bang on the door, scream at them, and immediately trigger their fight or fright response.
And then they will play the drums louder out of spite.
Yeah, and then I'll be buying a subwoofer to blast back at them through the ceiling. The engine is completely melted down.
Think about the physical geometry of how we usually argue. When you believe the person is the problem, you stand face to face.
Yeah.
You lock eyes. Your energy is directed straight at their chest.
Like a standoff.
Right. It is a zero-sum game of force. You are trying to push them backward.
So how do I cognitively separate the person from the problem in the middle of that 3 a.m. rage? What does that actually look like in practice?
It requires a physical and mental pivot. You step to the side.
Step to the side.
Instead of standing face to face with your opponent, imagine you pull up a chair and sit shoulder to shoulder with them. Then you take the issue, in this case the acoustic transmission of drum beats, through a floorboard at 3 a.m. and you objectify it. You place it on a table in front of both of you.
Okay, I see the visual.
You are no longer two combatants. You are two co-investigators looking at a shared puzzle.
I see the logic, I really do. But in the heat of the moment, doing that feels like surrendering.
How so?
It feels like letting them off the hook for their bad behavior. If I go upstairs and say, hey, we have an acoustics problem, I feel like I'm ignoring the fact that they are being incredibly selfish.
It's not surrender, though. It is a tactical redirection of energy. You aren't letting them off the hook. You're recruiting them to fix the hook. By declaring war on the enmity rather than the person, you stop wasting your neurological resources on hating them. And you free up your prefrontal cortex to engineer a solution.
Because I don't actually know their situation.
Exactly. Maybe they work a night shift and 3:00 a.m. is their only free time. Maybe they have no idea how thin the floors are. If you approach them as a co-investigator of the noise transmission problem, you drastically lower the chance of triggering their amygdala.
This shifts the entire landscape of how we interact, but it raises a question. If my opponent is no longer my enemy, what is my role in this dynamic? If we aren't fighting them and we've put the problem on the table, do I just sit back and watch?
Not at all.
Because the blueprint introduces a concept here that completely disrupts our usual ideas of peacemaking.
It introduces a term that requires a deep, deep recalibration of what it means to be involved in a conflict.
The text says, and I had to read this 3 times to even process what it was asking, it says, we practice omnipartiality or multipartiality. We refuse neutrality, which is indifference, in favor of multilateral involvement.
Omnipartiality.
Omnipartiality, what does that even mean?
Well, let's break it down. The prefix omni means all, like omnipresent or omniscient.
Right.
Partiality is having a bias, a preference, or a loyalty towards something. If you are partial to early mornings, you favor them.
So to be omnipartial.
It literally means to be biased towards everyone. You favor all sides simultaneously.
That sounds like an absolute paradox. How can you possibly take everyone's side in a dispute? Usually when people don't want to pick a side in a conflict, they claim to be neutral.
Right, the classic mediator stance.
Yeah, think about an office dispute between 2 managers. The boss steps in and says, look, I'm staying neutral here, you two figure it out. We typically view neutrality as the ultimate peaceful stance, like Switzerland.
Yes, we have a very romanticized view of neutrality.
But the blueprint equates neutrality with indifference and tells us to outright refuse it. Why is neutrality considered a failure here?
Because we think of neutrality as a state of calm objectivity. But in the messy reality of human friction, neutrality is completely passive. It is a stance taken outside the arena.
You're just watching.
Exactly. If you are neutral in an interpersonal conflict, what you are practically communicating is, I have no skin in this game. I do not care who wins, and I do not care who loses.
It's essentially washing your hands of the situation, like, not my circus, not my monkeys.
And in the face of someone else's suffering or frustration, that aloofness translates directly to indifference.
Yeah.
If the conflict is the engine, and the engine is overheating and starting to warp, standing back with your arms folded, neutrally watching it tear itself apart, that is an abdication of responsibility. The blueprint argues that this kind of passivity is exactly what allows the glitch of violence to thrive.
So if neutrality is standing outside the arena not caring who wins, omnipartiality is jumping into the center of the arena, grabbing both combatants by the shoulders and saying, I desperately want both of you to win.
That is beautifully put. It is multilateral involvement. It's rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty with everyone's needs.
I mean, can you give me an example of what that looks like?
A perfect example occurs every single day in parenting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine 2 young children fighting over a tablet. One child wants to play a game, the other wants to watch a cartoon. They start pulling the tablet back and forth, screaming.
A total meltdown.
Right, a parent intervenes. Is the parent neutral?
Absolutely not. I mean, a neutral observer wouldn't care if the children broke the tablet or made each other cry.
The parent is deeply, fiercely invested. They're wildly partial to the happiness, development, and emotional well-being of child A, and they are simultaneously equally partial to the happiness and emotional well-being of child B.
So they are holding the complexities and desires of both children in their mind at the exact same time.
Exactly. They're practicing omnipartiality.
I can see how that works for a parent who naturally loves both children, but man, that requires an immense amount of emotional capacity.
It really does.
It is so much easier to just be partial to one side. Like, a tired parent might just say, child A is older, they get the tablet, completely ignoring child B's feelings.
Or worse, they play the neutral card.
Right. They say, since you can't share, nobody gets the tablet.
The nobody wins solution. It is the most common default because it just shuts down the engine entirely.
It stops the immediate noise.
But it resolves absolutely nothing, and it just breeds resentment in both children.
Yeah.
To practice multilateral involvement, the parent has to dive into the friction. They have to validate child A's desire for the game, validate child B's desire for the cartoon, and actually work with them to engineer a solution.
Like setting a timer or finding a multiplayer game they both enjoy.
Exactly.
Let's scale this up, though, because practicing omnipartiality with strangers or, coworkers sounds emotionally exhausting.
Oh, it is exhausting.
If you are a mediator or a manager or just a friend caught in the middle of two people who despise each other, jumping in and deciding to be biased toward both of their well-being, that requires a massive suppression of your own ego.
It requires tremendous self-transcendence. Because when you enter a conflict, the combatant's immediate instinct is to assess your loyalty.
They want to know whose side you're on.
Always. If they think you are on their side, they will use you as a club to beat the opponent. If they think you're on the opponent's side, you instantly become a new enemy.
But if you step in and consistently demonstrate through your actions and your words that you are fighting for both of them,
You shatter that binary us versus them dynamic. You short-circuit the glitch. You pour coolant on the engine.
But you raise a vital point about the difficulty of doing this. If you are actively involved and you are biased toward everyone, what is the anchor for that bias?
Right. What's grounding you?
Because if you are sitting shoulder to shoulder with people who are behaving badly, what exactly are you fighting for?
Well, the blueprint gives us a rock-solid baseline to anchor ourselves to. The text says, we are partial to the dignity of all sides, fighting for a solution rather than against people.
There it is. The bias towards dignity.
Notice how the text utilizes the concept of dignity here. In many cultures, dignity is treated as a conditional status.
Like something you earn.
Exactly. It's something you earn through good behavior, and it is something you forfeit when you act poorly. The blueprint rejects that entirely. It treats dignity as a biological, non-negotiable baseline.
But practically speaking, this is where the rubber meets the road, and it is profoundly hard.
It is the hardest part.
It is incredibly difficult to maintain a commitment to someone's dignity when you are furious with them or when they are actively trying to harm you.
Right.
Like when someone betrays a confidence or screams at you in a meeting or even just cuts you off recklessly in traffic, our immediate human instinct is to strip them of their dignity. We call them idiots. We belittle their intelligence. We try to make them feel small so that we can feel powerful and safe.
Stripping an opponent of their dignity is the fastest, cheapest way to feel like you are winning a conflict without having to actually do the hard work of solving the problem.
Shortcut.
It's a shortcut to dominance. But dominance is just another manifestation of the glitch. Dominance is structural violence.
To understand how to separate behavior from dignity, I keep thinking about a medical triage team arriving at the scene of a horrific multi-car accident.
Okay, let's look at that.
Let's say it is blatantly obvious that one driver was speeding recklessly and caused the crash, severely injuring themselves and the innocent driver of the other car.
The scene is chaos.
Total chaos. The paramedics arrive on the scene. They do not look at the reckless driver trapped in their car and say, well, you caused this mess, you're a menace to society, so we are going to let you bleed out.
That would be a catastrophic violation of their professional and ethical mandate.
They don't fight against the driver who caused the crash. Their absolute, unwavering bias is toward the biological dignity and survival of every single human being on that asphalt.
They don't care about fault.
They don't care about fault, guilt, or morality in that exact moment. They fight for the solution, which is stabilizing vitals and keeping people alive. They will treat the reckless driver's collapsed lung with the exact same focus, urgency, and care as they treat the innocent victim's broken leg.
That is what it means to be partial to dignity.
It's powerful when you put it like that.
It is a phenomenal way to illustrate the mechanical shift from destructive to constructive conflict. Because when you fight against people, when you attack their dignity, you trigger a cascade of defensive reactions.
You trigger shame, anger,
and a desperate need for retaliation. The prefrontal cortex shuts down, the amygdala fires up, and the engine glitches. But when you fight for a solution while fiercely maintaining the baseline dignity of everyone involved, the engine continues to run. The development continues.
Let's do a tactical deep dive on this. Let's say you are managing a team, and two of your employees, Sarah and David, are in a heated argument over a project timeline.
Happens every day.
The engine is overheating. Sarah snaps and says to David in front of the whole room, "You are so unbelievably incompetent. A high school intern could manage the spreadsheet better than you. You're dragging the whole department down."
Okay, stop the tape right there. Let's analyze the mechanics of what Sarah just did.
She abandoned the timeline and attacked the person.
Specifically, she attacked his dignity.
Right. She belittled his intelligence and his worth to the team.
So if you are the manager and you are practicing omnipartiality, how do you intervene? How do you protect dignity without ignoring Sarah's legitimate frustration about the timeline?
Well, you can't be neutral. You can't just clear your throat and say, "Let's get back on track, guys."
No, that's indifference.
You have to address the breach. So you might say, "Sarah, I know you are under immense pressure to hit these deadlines, and your drive to keep us on schedule is vital. But calling David incompetent is unacceptable. We do not attack each other's intelligence here. David, I know you are managing a massive amount of data right now, and we value your thoroughness. We need to look at this spreadsheet together, side by side, and figure out where the bottleneck is."
Look at the architecture of that intervention.
Did I hit the marks?
You do. You validated Sarah's drive, protecting her dignity. You validated David's thoroughness, protecting his dignity. You set a firm, immovable boundary against the toxic behavior, the dignity violation.
And then, physically and metaphorically, I took the problem and put it back on the table for multilateral involvement.
You fought for the solution, not against Sarah or David.
And notice what I didn't do as the manager. I didn't take a side on the actual timeline dispute. I didn't say who was right about the spreadsheet. I was omnipartial to their needs and their dignity, which creates the psychological safety required for them to actually negotiate the timeline.
Which brings us to the operational phase of the blueprint. We have the cognitive mindset, separate the person from the problem. We have the stance, omnipartiality. We have the anchor, a bias toward dignity. Now, what is the actual tool we use to fix the problem on the table?
The text points us to a very specific methodology. It says, "We use the method of principled negotiations, focus on interests, not positions."
This is a direct reference to the foundational framework developed by the Harvard Negotiation Project, primarily articulated by Roger Fisher and William Ury in their work, Getting to Yes. It is the practical application of everything we've just discussed.
To understand why this is so revolutionary, we have to clearly define the difference between a position and an interest. Because in our daily lives, we constantly confuse the two.
You do. We think they're the same thing.
Let's use a classic, messy, incredibly relatable example. Let's go back to an office environment. Two coworkers share a small office, and they are engaged in a bitter turf war over the thermostat.
Oh, man. The thermostat is the site of more interpersonal friction than almost any other object in the modern world.
Absolutely. Wars are fought over this dial. So, coworker A's stance is, "I demand the thermostat be set to 72 degrees. Coworker B's stance is, "I demand the thermostat be set to 68 degrees.
The battle lines are drawn.
They spend all day glaring at each other, secretly changing the dial when the other goes to the bathroom. 72, no, 68. 72 is sweltering. 68 is freezing. Those two numbers, 72 and 68, are their positions.
A position is the what? It is the concrete surface-level demand. It is the specific solution that a party has predetermined will satisfy their needs.
And when we argue from positions, what we are essentially doing is building fortresses.
Fortresses. I like that.
Coworker A builds a fortress on Hill 72. Coworker B builds a fortress on Hill 68. And they just sit behind their walls, throwing rocks at each other. They aren't moving forward. Even if they compromise, say, they split the difference and set it to 70 degrees, neither of them gets what they want.
It's a lose-lose. The engine is stalled.
So the blueprint instructs us to ignore the fortresses entirely. It says focus on interests.
Right. If a position is the what, The interest is the why. It is the underlying motivation, the fear, the desire, or the biological need that caused the person to choose that specific position in the first place.
So we have to dig under the fortresses. If we sit down with coworker A and ask, why do you need it to be 72 degrees? We are searching for the interest.
What might say?
Coworker A might say, my desk is situated directly under the main AC vent. When the dial is at 68, freezing air blasts directly onto the back of my neck. I get tension headaches, and I can't concentrate on my work.
So the position was 72, but the interest is physical comfort, avoiding pain and being able to focus.
Exactly. And if we dig under coworker B's fortress and ask, why do you need it at 68, they might reveal a completely different motivation. I am required to wear the heavy, synthetic company uniform jacket for client meetings. If the room is above 68, I start sweating profusely. It makes me feel disgusting, and I'm terrified the clients will think I'm unprofessional.
The position was 68. The interest is physical comfort, maintaining professional dignity and avoiding embarrassment.
This is the breakthrough moment. Because when we look at the underlying interests, we realize that the fuel for development is right there. Their interests are not mutually exclusive.
Not at all.
Coworker A wants to avoid a draft on their neck. Coworker B wants to avoid sweating in their uniform. Both of those realities can exist in the same universe.
Now, instead of throwing rocks between fortresses, they can practice principled negotiation. They sit side by side, put the interests on the table, and brainstorm solutions.
Can they move coworker A's desk away from the vent?
Can they install a plastic deflector shield on the ceiling to redirect the airflow?
Can coworker B get an exemption to wear a lighter, breathable uniform shirt while in the office?
There are dozens of solutions that satisfy the underlying interests without either party having to surrender to the other's thermostat number.
It seems so obvious when we lay it out like this, so why don't we do it? Why do we spend our lives fiercely defending our positions like they are tied to our identity?
Because revealing an interest requires exposing a vulnerability. A position is a shield. It is hard, quantifiable, and safe. Saying, I will not pay a penny over $10,000 for this car is a position that projects strength. But saying, I can't pay more than $10,000 because my spouse just lost their job and I'm terrified we won't make rent next month is revealing an interest.
It exposes your soft underbelly.
It exposes fear, weakness, or desperation.
Wow. Coworker B doesn't want to admit they are embarrassed about sweating. Coworker A doesn't want to admit they are physically fragile to the cold. We cling to our positions because we are terrified that if we show the enemy our vulnerable interests, they will weaponize that information and use it to hurt us.
Which is exactly why the sequential architecture of this paragraph is so breathtaking. You
Yeah.
cannot simply walk into a room and demand that people reveal their vulnerable interests.
Right, they'd never do it.
If they still view you as the enemy, if their amygdala is firing, if they feel their dignity is under attack, they will never, ever lower their shields.
The blueprint is a step-by-step psychological unarming process.
Exactly. You must first recognize the conflict as an engine, not a threat. You must separate the person from the problem. You must eliminate enmity. You must establish a protective environment of omnipartiality and guarantee the baseline dignity of everyone involved.
And only then is the environment safe enough.
Only then is it safe enough for someone to lower the shield of their position and reveal the terrifying vulnerability of their true interest. Principled negotiation is not a parlor trick. It is the natural byproduct of an omnipartial environment.
This applies to massive societal conflicts just as much as office politics. Think about how we argue about culture or politics on social media.
Oh, social media is purely position-based warfare.
100%. We scream our positions into the void. We never feel safe enough to articulate the deep underlying fears, the interests about our safety, our families, our economic survival that cause us to hold those positions. So the societal engine just grinds and sparks and violently glitches.
We mistakenly call that grinding debate. But it isn't debate. It's a mechanical failure to communicate on the level of interests. Human ingenuity is unlocked when we ask why.
The why is everything.
The most fundamental human interests, security, belonging, recognition, autonomy, are rarely in conflict with each other. It is only the rigid, unimaginative positions we choose to achieve them that clash.
Okay, so let's follow the timeline here. We've separated the person from the problem. We've maintained dignity. We've dug down to the interests, and we found a solution. The deflector shield is on the vent. The spreadsheet timeline is fixed. The immediate problem is solved. Are we done?
Not even close.
Can we wipe our hands and walk away? Because the final sentence of point 11 delivers a mandate that warns us against stopping there.
This is the culmination of the entire philosophy. If you stop at solving the logistical problem, you leave the engine totally vulnerable to another breakdown.
The text says, we strive not just for a ceasefire, but for a restructuring of relationships through rehumanization. Our goal is conflict transformation.
We must dissect the difference between a ceasefire, conflict resolution, and conflict transformation.
Think about an argument you had with a partner, a really bad one. You argue for an hour, you both get exhausted, and you just stop talking. You go to separate rooms. The shouting has stopped, the fire has ceased.
But the air in the house is thick and toxic.
You are walking on eggshells. The problem was paused, but the relationship feels wounded. That is a ceasefire.
A ceasefire is merely the absence of direct, overt violence, is hitting the pause button on the glitch. Ceasefires are tactically necessary. I mean, you have to stop the bleeding before you can perform surgery, but a ceasefire is not peace.
It's just quiet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you stop there, the underlying resentments continue to fester in the dark, and the engine will inevitably overheat again.
Then you have conflict resolution, which is essentially fixing the immediate issue to return to the status quo. Like, we fixed the thermostat, now leave me alone so I can get back to typing.
But the blueprint demands conflict transformation, and it pairs it with this incredibly heavy word, rehumanization.
Let's analyze the implication of the prefix rehumanization implies restoring something that was lost. It is a profound admission that during the heat of the conflict, when the glitch was occurring, we actively dehumanized each other.
That is a really tough pill to swallow. We don't like to think of ourselves as people who dehumanize others.
No, we always think we're the good guys.
But we do it constantly. When we slip into enmity, when our amygdala takes over, we cognitively strip away the multidimensional humanity of our opponent. We reduce them to a caricature, an obstacle, a monster, or an idiot.
We make them less than human.
Dehumanization is the psychological prerequisite for violence. You cannot inflict emotional or physical harm on someone if you are fully, empathetically connected to their complex humanity. You have to turn them into an object first.
So if the glitch inherently involves dehumanizing the other person, then fixing the logistics of the problem isn't enough. You have to actively repair the psychological damage. You have to consciously rehumanize them. What does that actually sound like? What are the tactics of rehumanization?
It requires vulnerability from the person who caused the harm and grace from the person who received it. Practically, it looks like sitting down after the problem is solved, looking the person in the eye and acknowledging their experience.
It's an apology, but deeper.
It is apologizing, not just for the logistical error, but for the impact of your actions. It's saying, when I was arguing about the timeline, I got so defensive that I attacked your competence. I reduced you to a roadblock. That was wrong, and I see how hard you are working. It is the deliberate return of the dignity you tried to steal.
It's recognizing that the engine didn't just stall, it warped some of the metal around it, and we have to hammer those dents out together.
Which is the essence of conflict transformation. Conflict resolution asks, how do we make this annoying problem go away so we can get back to normal? Conflict transformation asks a radical question. How do we utilize this friction, this specific conflict of interest, to change the very nature of our relationship so that we emerge stronger, more deeply connected, and more resilient than we were before the fight started?
Oh, that is profound. The conflict isn't a detour on the road. The conflict is the road. The engine actually powers the development.
Exactly.
If coworker A and coworker B undergo this process, they don't just walk away with a plastic vent deflector. They walk away with a deeper understanding of each other. Coworker A knows coworker B feels pressure to look professional. Coworker B knows coworker A is sensitive to physical discomfort. They have built a new layer of trust. Their relationship has been transformed by the friction.
And that transformation is the ultimate patch for the software glitch. Rehumanization ensures that the next time their interests clash, and they will, because life is constant friction, they have the structural integrity, the shared trust, and the omnipartial habits to process that friction without short-circuiting into violence.
I want to push this framework to its absolute limit before we wrap up. The thermostat, the noisy knit, these are relatable, everyday examples. But if this blueprint is truly meant to be an architecture for a peaceful civilization, it has to hold up under the weight of severe, high-stakes, deeply entrenched conflicts.
It has to scale.
What happens when the engine has been running incredibly hot for decades?
That is the crucial stress test for point 11. If these concepts only work when the stakes are low, then it's just a guide to polite office etiquette. Let's look at a scenario characterized by historical trauma, profound enmity, and frequent glitches of actual violence.
Let's talk about the friction between law enforcement and marginalized communities in a highly fractured city.
A perfect, high-stakes example.
You have two massive fortresses. On one hill, you have a community that feels systematically over-policed, targeted, and unheard. Their position might manifest as defund the police or remove law enforcement from our neighborhoods.
And on the other hill,
On the other hill, you have a police department that feels under siege, unappreciated, and constantly in physical danger. Their position is, we need more funding, harsher penalties for non-compliance, and unquestioning respect.
the enmity is incredibly thick. The dehumanization is rampant on both sides. Communities view officers merely as armed enforcers of an oppressive state. Officers view community members merely as potential threats or statistics. They're locked in a cycle of mutual dignity destruction.
And normally, the politicians or community leaders caught in the middle try to play the neutral card. They give a press conference saying, we understand both sides are frustrated and we urge everyone to remain calm.
Which, as we've established, is just passive indifference. It solves nothing while the city burns.
Or they become highly partial cheerleaders for one fortress, which just pours gasoline on the enmity of the other.
If an omnipartial mediator, operating on the principles of this blueprint, steps into that volatile valley, the work is going to be grueling, messy, and take years. There is no magic wand. But the architecture of how they begin is clear. They must start with the anchor, the bias towards dignity.
They have to step into the crossfire and publicly refuse to dehumanize either side.
Exactly. The mediator must unequivocally state that the life, safety, and dignity of a young person walking home at night in that marginalized community is sacred and entirely non-negotiable.
And in the very same breath, they must state that the life, safety, and dignity of a police officer navigating a high-stress crisis call is also sacred and entirely non-negotiable.
In a deeply polarized environment, asserting the baseline dignity of the enemy is an act of immense political and social courage. The community might accuse the mediator of being an apologist for state violence. The police union might accuse them of being anti-law enforcement.
Because everyone wants you to pick a side.
Right. Omnipartiality is lonely because you are refusing the tribal instinct to pick a fortress. You are pledging loyalty only to human dignity and the pursuit of a solution.
So the mediator anchors on dignity. They cognitively separate the person from the problem. The problem isn't evil cops or criminal citizens. The problem is a fundamentally broken, historically burdened system of public safety. They managed to get representatives to put that problem on the table. How do they navigate the positions? Defund versus increase funding are mutually exclusive.
This is where principled negotiation must be applied with surgical precision. The mediator has to look past the political slogans and ask the terrifyingly vulnerable question, why? Why does the community demand defunding? What is the core interest beneath the fortress?
If you listen deeply, the interest of the community isn't a desire for chaos or a lack of safety. Their core interest is the desire to live without the constant gnawing fear of harassment or violence from the state. It is a need for resources to be channeled into mental health, education, and youth intervention so that crime doesn't germinate in the first place. Their interest is holistic, systemic safety.
Now turn to the police department. Why do they demand more funding and militarized compliance? What is the interest beneath their fortress? It is not merely a cartoonish desire for authoritarian power. Their underlying interest is the desperate need to survive a highly dangerous shift and go home to their families alive.
To be physically safe.
It is a need for clear protocols, adequate training to handle severe psychological crises that they were never equipped for, and a desire to not be scapegoated for every societal failure.
This is where the blueprint breaks your brain in the best way possible. When you strip away the hostile positions, you realize that the community and the police officers share the exact same fundamental interest. They both want to be physically safe in their environment, and they both want to go home to their families without fear.
The interests are aligned. The conflict is not about the desire for safety. The conflict is entirely about the methodology of achieving it. The friction is between community-led social investment versus armed emergency response. If they can channel that friction omnipartially, they can engineer a comprehensive public safety model that utilizes both.
But, and this is the grueling part you mentioned, none of that logistical negotiation holds up without rehumanization. Finding shared interests on a whiteboard doesn't erase decades of trauma.
It doesn't. Conflict transformation in this scenario requires a sustained, agonizingly vulnerable process of looking at the human cost. The officer has to sit in a room and look into the eyes of a mother who is terrified for her son and recognize her pain without getting defensive. The community member has to look at the officer and see a human being who is carrying the traumatic burden of witnessing the city's worst days.
It is the deliberate piece-by-piece restoration of humanity. If they can achieve that, even incrementally, they don't just get a temporary drop in crime statistics, they restructure the relationship, they transform the system. Maybe police departments integrate deeply with unarmed crisis response teams. Maybe the community takes ownership of neighborhood mediation. The engine of their massive, painful conflict generates a higher level of societal evolution.
It requires an incredible amount of discipline. We are fighting millions of years of evolutionary biology every time we choose not to strike back when we feel threatened. The broader manifesto calls this conscious evolution. We have to actively override our Paleolithic tribal emotions with our prefrontal cortex.
We have to practice it.
We have to learn the physical sensation of enmity rising in our chests, and in that split second, choose to exhale, step to the side, and look at the problem on the table instead of attacking the person across from us.
The word glitch really is the key to hope here. A glitch isn't a permanent hardware failure. You can reset the device. You can install a patch. Every single time we catch ourselves attacking a person instead of the problem, we have the opportunity to hit reset. We can stop mid-sentence and say, I'm sorry, my amygdala just hijacked me. I'm attacking your position. Let me back up. What is it that you actually need here? What is your underlying interest?
What is it that you actually need here? That might be the most powerful omnipartial tool in the English language. It immediately diffuses hostility. It recruits the opponent into co-investigation. It demonstrates, practically, that you are fiercely partial to their well-being.
And it protects their dignity by proving that their needs are worth asking about. It's a perfect, continuous feedback loop.
The algorithm is elegant. Recognize the engine. Separate person from problem. Target enmity. Practice omnipartiality. Anchor in dignity. Uncover interests. Transform through rehumanization.
It scales from 2 toddlers fighting over a toy, to coworkers fighting over a spreadsheet, to communities fighting for their lives. The physics of the internal combustion engine do not change, no matter how massive the machine gets.
The physics remain constant. The only variable in the equation is our willingness. Are we willing to do the exhausting, ego-crushing work of being the engineers who maintain the system? Or will we take the easy, primitive route and be the arsonists who burn it down?
My brain feels completely rewired by this. We have to wrap up, but let's quickly recap the sheer density of the journey we just took through point 11. We started by tearing down the idea that friction is a disease and embraced the reality that a conflict of interest is the necessary engine of all human development.
We simply have to eliminate the glitch, the violence and destruction that occur when we fail to manage that friction.
We prevent the glitch by performing a cognitive pivot, separating the person from the problem. We pull up a chair next to our opponent, put the issue on the table, and realize that our true biological enemy is the enmity in our own minds.
We reject the passive, aloof indifference of neutrality. Instead, we take on the heavy, active mantle of omnipartiality, becoming fiercely, equally biased toward the well-being and dignity of every single person involved.
We fight for solutions, never against people. We stop building fortified walls out of our rigid positions, and we find the psychological courage to dig down and expose our vulnerable underlying interests.
And crucially, we don't stop when the shouting ends. We don't settle for the toxic silence of a ceasefire. We commit to the grueling work of rehumanization, using the conflict not to destroy each other, but to transform and restructure the relationship into something vastly more resilient.
I want to challenge you, the listener, to take this out of the theoretical realm and apply it today. The very next time you feel your personal engine glitching, maybe someone sends a passive-aggressive email, maybe your spouse criticizes how you loaded the dishwasher, maybe you read a political headline that makes your blood boil. I want you to pause. Just take 2 seconds. Feel the enmity rising and consciously override it. Separate the person from the problem. Remind yourself that they are not the enemy. Protect their dignity in your own mind and ask yourself what their underlying interest might be. Be the architect of that tiny moment.
You have the blueprint. The tools are yours to use.
You really do. And as we sign off, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought, a question to carry with you. We've talked a lot about interpersonal friction today, but zoom out. Think about the massive, seemingly unsolvable global conflicts that dominate our news feeds, the ones that look like jagged white lines on an X-ray. We look at those wars, those deep societal divides, and we say, it's terminal. It's just human nature. The patient is broken.
we give up on them.
But if point 11 of this blueprint is right, if violence is truly just a system glitch and rehumanization is the ultimate software patch, what does that say about those global conflicts we currently dismiss as unsolvable? Are they actually impossible to fix? Or are we simply refusing to do the hard, messy, omnipartial work of being the engineers? Are we just letting the engines burn because we haven't found the courage to read the blueprint? Something to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you out there.